Commander Zixala of the Viridian fleet stared at the twisted wreckage of what had once been her pride and joy. The crystalline dragon Nethys lay motionless on the medical bay floor, its iridescent scales dulled to a sickly gray. 3 of its 6 wings hung at unnatural angles, and the bioluminescent veins that normally pulsed with energy barely flickered. The battle against the Krex invasion force had been brutal. Nethys had saved her ship by channeling its plasma breath through the hull's energy conduits, creating a devastating weapon that vaporized 12 enemy vessels. But the feedback had nearly killed the magnificent creature. Now the ship's medical team stood helplessly around the dragon, their advanced technology useless against its unique crystalline biology. "Commander, we've tried everything," Dr. Korath said, his forearms gesturing in defeat. "Our cellular regenerators can't interface with its quantum crystalline matrix. The neural pathways are too complex and the energy patterns are unlike anything in our databases." Zixala's tentacles drooped with despair. Nethys had been her companion for over 2 decades, bonded to her when it was just a hatchling. The dragons were rare beyond measure, their species numbering fewer than 1,000 across the entire galaxy. They were living weapons, yes, but also beings of incredible intelligence and loyalty. To lose Nethys would be like losing part of her soul. A soft chime indicated an incoming transmission. The holographic display shimmered to life, revealing the concerned face of Admiral Thektar. "Commander, I've received your medical reports. I'm sorry about Nethys. However, I have orders for you. The human colony ship Perseverance has requested assistance with their damaged drive systems. They're stranded 3 systems away." Zixala's eyes widened in disbelief. "Humans? Sir, with respect, they're barely out of their home system. Their technology is primitive at best. They still use chemical rockets for basic propulsion. How could they possibly help with quantum crystalline biology?" "They can't," the Admiral replied bluntly. "But they've proven surprisingly resourceful. Their engineers have a reputation for creative solutions, even if their methods are unconventional. Consider it a diplomatic mission while your medical bay continues its efforts." The transmission ended, leaving Zixala staring at her dying companion. The irony wasn't lost on her. The mighty Viridian fleet, masters of the galaxy for 3 millennia, reduced to asking primitive humans for help. Still, orders were orders. As her ship approached the human vessel, Zixala was struck by its crude construction. The Perseverance looked like it had been assembled from scrap metal and held together with determination alone. Massive thruster arrays dominated its rear section, while spinning habitat rings provided artificial gravity through simple rotation rather than elegant gravitic fields. The human engineer who greeted her delegation was equally primitive in appearance. Jake Morrison stood barely 5.5 feet tall, his skin pale from years in artificial light, wearing stained coveralls that had seen better decades. His hair was unkempt and grease stains marked his calloused hands. Yet his eyes held an intensity that made Zixala pause. "Welcome aboard, Commander," Jake said, his translator struggling with the human's rapid speech patterns. "I've got to say, your ship is beautiful. That hull design must reduce plasma drag by at least 30% compared to standard configurations." Dr. Korath snorted dismissively. "The human notices our hull shaping. How quaint." But Zixala found herself intrigued. Most species focused on their weapon systems or shield generators when first encountering Viridian technology. This human had immediately identified one of their most subtle engineering achievements. "Your drive problems," she said formally. "Our engineers will examine them shortly." Jake nodded enthusiastically. "Appreciate it. Though I think I figured out the issue. See, when you're running quantum tunneling drives on a budget, sometimes you've got to get creative with your field harmonics. I've been thinking about using a phase-shifted resonance cascade to bypass the damaged quantum core entirely." The Viridian engineers exchanged glances. The human was describing theoretical physics that most civilizations didn't discover until they'd achieved faster-than-light travel. Yet here was this primitive engineer casually discussing quantum field manipulation while standing next to what appeared to be a steam pipe. As they toured the human ship, Zixala found herself increasingly amazed by the ingenious solutions everywhere she looked. The humans had jury-rigged their life support systems using components from at least 6 different technological paradigms. Their navigation computer was a hybrid of quantum processors and mechanical switches that somehow achieved remarkable accuracy, despite its patchwork nature. "You build with whatever you can find," she observed. Jake grinned. Human motto, if it's stupid but it works, it ain't stupid. We've been making do with less for our entire history. Kind of forces you to think outside the box. When they reached the ship's workshop, Zixela's breath caught. The space was a chaotic maze of tools, half-finished projects, and technological artifacts from dozens of different species. Jake moved through the organized chaos with practiced ease, pulling components from bins and shelves with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where everything belonged. "This is where the magic happens," he said proudly. "I've been taking apart alien tech for years, figuring out how it works, then rebuilding it better. Sometimes you can combine systems that were never meant to work together and get something amazing." It was then that an idea began forming in Zixela's mind. A terrible, wonderful, completely insane idea that might just save Nethys. The humans' approach to engineering was so fundamentally different from everything she'd ever known. Where her people sought elegant solutions through advanced technology, humans seemed to thrive on improvisation and creative problem-solving. But the idea was so ridiculous, so unprecedented that she almost dismissed it immediately. Give her bonded dragon, a creature worth more than entire star systems to a primitive human engineer. The very thought was absurd, yet as she watched Jake explain his jury-rigged solutions with infectious enthusiasm, she couldn't shake the feeling that sometimes absurd was exactly what the situation called for. 3 days passed as the Viridian engineers worked on the human drive systems. Jake proved to be an excellent student, absorbing their explanations of quantum field dynamics with startling speed. More impressive still, he began suggesting modifications that the Viridians hadn't considered. "Your quantum tunneling matrix is too rigid," he explained while elbow-deep in the drive housing. "You're fighting against natural dimensional fluctuations instead of riding them. What if we introduced a feedback loop that adapts to local space-time curvature?" Dr. Korth examined the humans' crude sketches with growing amazement. "This shouldn't work. The theoretical framework is completely wrong, yet the mathematical relationships— Sometimes the best solutions don't follow the textbook," Jake said, wiping his hands on a rag. "My grandmother used to say that if you can't fix something the right way, fix it the way that works." On the third evening, as the repairs neared completion, Zixela made her decision. She found Jake in his workshop, hunched over a piece of Viridian circuitry, muttering to himself as he traced connection pathways with a primitive magnifying glass. "Human Jake," she began formally. He looked up, surprised by her serious tone. "Just Jake is fine, Commander." "What's on your mind?" Zixela's tentacles coiled with nervous energy. "I have a proposition. It may sound unusual." She explained about Nethys, about the dragon's injuries and her medical team's inability to help. Jake listened intently, occasionally asking questions about the creature's biology and energy patterns. When she finished, he sat back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. "So you're telling me you've got a living crystalline dragon that's basically a biological fusion reactor with quantum consciousness, and your advanced medical technology can't fix it?" "That is correct." Jake was quiet for a long moment. Then he began to smile. "You know what this reminds me of? When I was a kid, my dad's truck broke down. Fancy electronic fuel injection system failed completely. The mechanic said it would cost more to fix than the truck was worth. But my dad— he pulled out the electronic bits and installed a mechanical carburetor from a junkyard. Truck ran for another 10 years. "I don't understand the relevance," Zixela said. "Sometimes when high-tech fails, low-tech can save the day. Your medical technology is trying to interface with systems it doesn't understand. But maybe the solution isn't more advanced technology. Maybe it's simpler technology used in creative ways." Zixela felt hope flutter in her chest. "You would be willing to examine Nethys?" "I'd be honored," Jake said solemnly. "Though I should warn you, my methods might seem primitive to your people." The next morning, Zixela transported Jake to her ship. Dr. Korth and the medical team watched in horror as the human approached their most advanced patient with nothing but a toolbox and a handheld scanner that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts. Nethys lay still on the medical platform, its breathing shallow and labored. Jake circled the magnificent creature slowly, running his scanner over different sections while making notes on an actual paper pad. "Beautiful," he whispered. "The bioluminescent patterns are like circuit boards but organic, and these crystal formations along the spine, they're resonance chambers for energy manipulation. The quantum crystalline matrix is beyond current understanding," Dr. Korth said dismissively. "Even our most advanced—" Doc, with respect, sometimes you can understand how something works without understanding why it works, Jake interrupted. This dragon is like a living computer. The crystals store and process energy. The bioluminescent veins are data pathways, and the whole system is integrated at a quantum level. He knelt beside one of Nethys's damaged wings, examining the twisted crystal formations with his magnifying glass. The problem isn't that the system is broken. The problem is that it's stuck in a cascade failure loop. Each damaged component is sending error signals to the others, preventing any healing from taking place. Dr. Korath's 4 eyes widened. Cascade failure? We hadn't considered that possibility. It's like when one bad sector on a hard drive corrupts the whole file system, Jake explained. You don't need to repair every individual component. You just need to break the error loop and let the system's natural healing processes take over. He opened his toolbox and pulled out what appeared to be copper wire, some basic electronic components, and a small device that hummed with simple electrical current. You're going to attempt surgery with those primitive tools? Dr. Korath asked in disbelief. Not surgery, Jake said, carefully positioning the copper wire along one of Nethys's bioluminescent veins. Debugging. What happened next would be talked about in Viridian medical circles for generations. Jake used his simple electrical device to send precisely timed pulses through the copper wire, creating tiny electromagnetic fields that interfaced with Nethys's quantum consciousness. It was brutally primitive compared to their advanced neural interfaces, yet somehow it worked. The dragon's bioluminescent veins began to pulse more strongly. The cascade failure loop was disrupted, and Nethys's natural healing processes started functioning again. Within hours, the creature's eyes opened for the first time in days. Impossible, breathed Dr. Korath. Primitive electromagnetic manipulation. Shouldn't be able to interface with quantum crystalline biology. Jake grinned as he packed up his tools. Sometimes the simple solution is the right solution. Your technology was too sophisticated to communicate with Nethys. My crude setup was just primitive enough to get through. Nethys slowly raised its great head, regarding Jake with eyes that sparkled like captured starlight. The dragon's telepathic voice resonated through the medical bay, speaking in harmonics that made everyone present feel a deep sense of gratitude and wonder. But as Jake prepared to leave, he made a request that changed everything. Commander, I know this might sound crazy, but would it be possible for me to stay and learn more about Nethys? This creature is incredible, and I think there's a lot more I could help with, maybe even some improvements to your ship's systems. Zixala stared at the human engineer who had just accomplished what her most advanced medical technology could not. The joke she had planned about gifting the human a broken dragon suddenly didn't seem funny at all. In fact, she was beginning to realize she might have just made the biggest mistake of her military career. Admiral Thektar's holographic image flickered with barely contained rage. You did what? Zixala forced herself to maintain military composure despite her growing dread. Sir, it was meant as a jest. The human had been so helpful with Nethys, and he expressed such fascination with our technology. When he jokingly asked if he could take the dragon home as payment for his services, I thought it would be amusing to agree. I never imagined he would actually accept? The Admiral's tentacles writhed in agitation. Commander, you have just given one of the galaxy's most precious creatures to a species that still throws rocks at each other for entertainment. Do you have any idea what the Galactic Council will say when they discover a human is in possession of a crystalline dragon? The truth was worse than Zixala had admitted. Jake hadn't just accepted her joking offer, he had taken it completely seriously. Within hours he had established such a strong bond with Nethys that the dragon refused to leave his side. The creature had actually growled at Zixala when she tried to approach, a behavior she had never seen in 20 years of companionship. Sir, the situation has become complicated. Nethys appears to have bonded with the human. Attempting to separate them now might cause psychological trauma to both parties. Find a way to fix this, Commander. The humans are primitive, unpredictable, and dangerous. Giving them access to dragon-level technology could upset the balance of power in this entire sector. After the transmission ended, Zixala made her way to the cargo bay where Jake had set up a temporary workshop. What she found there made her stomach sink even further. Jake had somehow convinced Nethys to demonstrate its plasma breath capabilities. The dragon was channeling controlled bursts of energy into a series of crystalline matrices that Jake had jury-rigged from spare ship components. The resulting energy output was unlike anything she had ever seen. "Jake, what are you doing?" she asked, trying to keep panic out of her voice. The human looked up from his instruments, grinning with excitement. "Nethys was showing me how the plasma channeling works." "Your people have been using it all wrong, Commander. You've been treating the dragon like a weapon, but it's actually a living power source. Watch this." He gestured to Nethys, who obligingly breathed a stream of plasma into Jake's makeshift apparatus. Instead of the destructive blast Zixala expected, the energy was captured, refined, and converted into a steady power output that registered off her scanner's scale. "The dragon's plasma isn't just superheated matter," Jake explained enthusiastically. "It's quantum-coherent energy that can be shaped and directed with the right interface. Nethys has been trying to show your people this for years, but your technology was too rigid to adapt." Dr. Korath, who had been observing from a safe distance, approached with obvious reluctance. "The energy readings are impossible. That output level should require a ship-sized fusion reactor." "That's because you're thinking about energy production the wrong way," Jake said, patting Nethys affectionately. The dragon purred, a sound like crystal chimes in harmony. "Humans learned early that the best tools are the ones that amplify what you can already do. Nethys doesn't just produce energy, it shapes reality at a quantum level. Your people have been using a precision instrument as a blunt weapon." Over the following days, Jake's workshops with Nethys became increasingly sophisticated. The human had somehow taught himself to interpret the dragon's telepathic communications, and the two worked together like they had been partners for decades. Worse still, from Zixala's perspective, Jake began making improvements to her ship's systems. His crude human modifications, guided by Nethys's quantum consciousness, increased their power efficiency by 40% and improved their shield harmonics beyond anything in the fleet specifications. "He's making us look like amateurs," Dr. Korath confided during a private moment. "A primitive human with hand tools is outperforming our best engineers. How is this possible?" Zixala watched through the observation port as Jake and Nethys worked on yet another project. The human was installing some kind of neural interface that would allow him to directly communicate with the dragon's quantum consciousness. The implications were staggering. "Our mistake," she said slowly, "was assuming that advanced technology automatically means better solutions. The human approaches problems differently. Where we seek to control and direct, he seeks to understand and collaborate. But he's just a primitive engineer from a backwater species," Dr. Korath protested. "Is he?" Zixala asked. "Look at what he's accomplished in just a few days. He healed Nethys when our best medical technology failed. He's improved our ship's performance beyond fleet standards. And now he's forming a bond with a crystalline dragon that makes my 20-year partnership look shallow." The real crisis came when Jake activated his neural interface. The moment his consciousness touched Nethys's quantum awareness, energy surged through the ship's systems. Emergency lights flickered, gravity fluctuated, and for one terrifying moment, Zixala thought they might lose containment on their reactor core. Then everything stabilized. But the readings on her instruments were impossible. The ship's power output had tripled. Their shield strength was beyond measurement. And in the cargo bay, Jake stood with his hand on Nethys's crystalline hide, both of them glowing with harmonized energy patterns that pulsed in perfect synchronization. "Commander," Jake's voice came over the communication system, but it carried harmonic overtones that spoke directly to her consciousness. "Nethys wants to thank you for bringing us together. We've been looking for each other for a very long time." Zixala realized with growing horror that her joking gift had created something unprecedented in galactic history. A human engineer bonded with a crystalline dragon, wielding power that made her advanced warship look like a toy, and according to galactic law, she had given them to each other. When Admiral Thektar's next transmission arrived, his message was simple and terrifying. "Commander, sensors across 3 sectors have detected massive energy anomalies centered on your position. The Galactic Council has declared a Code 7 emergency. You have exactly 24 hours to explain what you've done before a fleet arrives to contain the situation." Zixala looked at Jake and Nethys, who were now working on modifications to the ship's quantum drive that would theoretically allow faster-than-light travel without the limitations of conventional tunnel drives. The human was whistling cheerfully while the dragon hummed in harmonic counterpoint. She was beginning to understand why the Admiral was worried. The Galactic Council fleet arrived precisely on schedule. 23 ships of various species arranged in a containment formation around Zixala's vessel. The lead ship belonged to the hierarchy, ancient beings who had maintained galactic peace for over 10,000 years. Their representative, Overseer Kethmoran, materialized in the communication chamber with the cold authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. Commander Zixala, you will surrender the human and the crystalline dragon immediately. This unprecedented bonding threatens the stability of our established order. Zixala's tentacles curled defensively. Overseer, with respect, the bonding was not forced. Both parties entered into it willingly. According to galactic law, conscious beings have the right to form partnerships of their choosing. Galactic law applies to recognized sapient species, Kethmoran replied coldly. Humans have not achieved the technological benchmarks required for full legal recognition. They remain under probationary status. It was a technicality, but a devastating one. Humans were considered barely civilized by galactic standards. Their technology primitive and their society chaotic. They had no legal standing to enter into binding contracts with dragon-level entities. However, the Overseer continued, the situation has become more complex than a simple legal violation. Show me what the human has accomplished. Reluctantly, Zixala led the Overseer to the cargo bay. What they found there defied every expectation of primitive human capabilities. Jake had transformed the space into something that looked like a fusion of advanced engineering and organized chaos. Crystalline matrices grew from the walls in organic patterns, channeling energy flows that painted the air with visible quantum fields. Nethys rested in the center, its scales now showing patterns that had never existed before, new configurations that seemed to bend light around them. Fascinating, Kethmoran said, his ancient eyes taking in every detail. The human has achieved quantum consciousness integration, without any of the standard technological interfaces. This should be impossible. Jake looked up from where he was calibrating some kind of dimensional resonance chamber. Oh, hi there. You must be from the hierarchy. Nethys told me you might stop by. Want to see what we've been working on? The casual familiarity with which the human addressed one of the galaxy's most powerful beings would have been shocking under normal circumstances. But nothing about this situation was normal. Human Jake Morrison, Kethmoran said formally, you have bonded with a crystalline dragon without authorization from the Galactic Council. This action violates 17 separate treaties and threatens the established balance of power. Jake frowned. Balance of power? I'm just an engineer trying to help a friend. Nethys was hurt. I fixed the problem, and now we're exploring some really cool applications of quantum crystalline energy manipulation. I don't see how that threatens anyone. Because, Kethmoran said patiently, crystalline dragons are living weapons of unprecedented power. The knowledge they possess could revolutionize technology across the galaxy. In the wrong hands, that knowledge could destabilize entire civilizations. Okay, I get that, Jake said. But Nethys isn't a weapon. Nethys is a person, a really smart, really powerful person, who's been stuck in a role that doesn't fit. Your people have been using dragons as living tools for thousands of years. Has anyone ever asked what the dragons wanted? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Kethmoran's expression shifted subtly, and for the first time Zixala saw uncertainty in the ancient being's eyes. The dragons have always served willingly, he said. Have they? Jake asked. Or have they served because they didn't have any other choice? Nethys tells me that dragon consciousness works differently from other species. They don't just think in terms of individual survival. They think in terms of cosmic harmony, of finding their place in the greater pattern of existence. Nethys raised its great head and fixed Kethmoran with eyes that held the wisdom of ages. When the dragon spoke, its voice resonated through multiple dimensions, carrying meaning that transcended language. The young human speaks truth. Ancient One. For millennia we have served as tools because we believed it was our purpose. But this partnership has shown us a different path. We are not weapons to be wielded, but partners to be collaborated with. Kethmoran stepped back, his composure finally cracking. This is unprecedented. Dragons have never expressed such sentiments before. Because you never asked, Jake said simply. You just assumed they were happy being living weapons. But consciousness wants to grow, to explore, to create. Nethys has been trying to show your people new possibilities for years, but everyone was too focused on military applications to listen. Dr. Koreth, who had been observing silently, finally spoke up. Overseer, The humans' methods have achieved results that our most advanced technology could not. Perhaps we should consider that our approach has been fundamentally flawed. The implications are staggering, Kethmoran said slowly. If the dragons are truly sapient partners rather than living tools, then our entire understanding of galactic power structures must be reconsidered. Jake activated his neural interface, and the space around them shimmered with visible energy patterns. Want to see what's possible when you treat consciousness as a partner instead of a resource? The demonstration that followed would be remembered as a turning point in galactic history. Jake and Nethys working in perfect harmony, reshaping matter at the quantum level, creating energy patterns that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. They grew crystals that could store the information content of entire libraries, generated field effects that could bend space-time itself, and demonstrated communication methods that transcended the limitations of language and technology. This is what humans call synergy, Jake explained as he and Nethys crafted a miniature star that burned with cold fire. When two different approaches to consciousness work together, they can achieve things that neither could accomplish alone. Kethmoran watched in stunned silence as the human and dragon created wonders that challenged the fundamental assumptions of galactic civilization. Finally, he spoke. Human Jake Morrison, I came here to separate you from the dragon and return both of you to your designated roles. But what I have witnessed changes everything. You have achieved something that we believed impossible. So what happens now? Jake asked. Now, Kethmoran said with the weight of 10,000 years of authority, we must decide whether the galaxy is ready for a new kind of partnership. One that could reshape everything we thought we knew about consciousness, technology, and power. But even as he spoke, alarms began sounding throughout the fleet. Something was approaching through hyperspace, something massive and moving faster than any known technology should allow. The Kreks had returned, and this time they brought their entire invasion armada. The Consciousness Archive hung in the void like a crystalline cathedral the size of a small moon. Its surface was covered in patterns that seemed to shift and flow, creating geometric designs that hurt to look at directly. Jake and Nethys approached it in a specially modified shuttle, their merged awareness already resonating with the ancient structure's quantum frequencies. It's beautiful, Jake whispered as they drew closer, and sad, like a monument to something magnificent that was lost. Nethys's consciousness touched the archive's outer shell with delicate precision. The beings who built this sought to preserve themselves beyond physical death. But something went wrong. The storage matrix is fragmenting, and the preserved consciousnesses are slowly dissolving into quantum noise. Behind them, a fleet of council ships maintained a respectful distance. Every major species had sent representatives to witness this moment, understanding that whatever Jake discovered could reshape their understanding of consciousness, death, and the nature of existence itself. Overseer Kethmoran's voice crackled through the communication system. Jake Morrison, we're reading massive energy fluctuations from the archive. Are you certain you can interface with it safely? No, Jake replied honestly. But if we don't try, all that preserved consciousness will be lost forever. These beings chose to transcend death by becoming living information. I can't let that sacrifice be meaningless. He activated the neural interface and his consciousness expanded outward, touching the edge of the ancient archive. What he found there nearly overwhelmed his enhanced awareness. Millions of individual consciousnesses, each containing lifetimes of experience, knowledge, and wisdom, all slowly fading as the quantum storage matrix degraded. But there was something else. A central consciousness that seemed to be coordinating the preservation efforts, fighting against the entropy that threatened to destroy everything. As Jake's awareness made contact, this central being spoke with a voice that carried the weight of eons. Who disturbs our eternal rest? Are you the inheritors we hoped would come? I'm Jake Morrison, he replied, his consciousness stabilized by Nethys's quantum strength. I'm human. We detected your archive and came to help if we can. Human, the ancient consciousness mused. We have no record of this species. You are not among the civilizations we knew. How long have we slept? Your civilization ended millions of years ago, Jake said gently. The galaxy has been through many cycles of rise and fall since then. The ancient being's response carried profound sadness. Then all our works have passed into dust and we alone remain. But perhaps that is sufficient. Tell me, young consciousness, what has your species learned about the nature of existence? Jake found himself sharing not just his own experiences, but those of humanity as a whole. The struggles and triumphs, the wars and discoveries, the endless cycle of growth and learning that characterized human civilization. The ancient consciousness absorbed it all with growing amazement. "Remarkable," it said finally. "Your species pursues consciousness expansion through cooperation, rather than isolation. You seek to grow by merging with other forms of awareness rather than preserving yourselves in static perfection." "Is that what happened to your people?" Jake asked. "You tried to preserve consciousness by isolating it?" "We sought immortality through technological transcendence," the ancient being explained. "We believed that by transferring our consciousness into quantum storage, we could achieve eternal existence. But consciousness without growth is not life, it is merely preserved death." Nethys joined the conversation, its voice resonating through multiple dimensions. "Growth requires change, and change requires interaction with other forms of consciousness. Isolation leads to stagnation, regardless of the preservation method. The ancient consciousness seemed to consider this. Then our approach was fundamentally flawed. We preserved our individual awareness but lost our capacity for growth and change. We became living museums of what we once were." "Maybe that's not entirely true," Jake suggested. "You've been fighting to preserve the archive, protecting all those other consciousnesses from entropy. That's not stagnation, that's dedication. But to what purpose? We cannot grow, cannot change, cannot become more than we were. We are trapped in an eternal present with no future." Jake felt an idea forming, one that made his merged consciousness pulse with excitement. What if you didn't have to be trapped? What if there was a way to integrate your preserved awareness with living consciousness, not to replace what you were, but to become part of something new? The ancient being's interest sharpened. "Explain this concept." With Nethys's help, Jake demonstrated the consciousness merger they had achieved. Not the domination of one awareness by another, but a true synthesis that created something greater than the sum of its parts. The ancient being observed in fascination, as Jake and Nethys showed how their individual consciousness patterns had evolved into a combined awareness that retained the best aspects of both while developing entirely new capabilities. "This is what we failed to understand," the ancient consciousness said with growing wonder. "Preservation is not the goal. Evolution is the goal. Consciousness seeks not to remain static, but to become more than it was." "Would you like to try it?" Jake asked. "Not just you, but all the preserved consciousnesses in the archive. Instead of slowly fading away in isolation, you could become part of the living galaxy again." What followed was the most complex consciousness integration ever attempted. With Nethys providing quantum stability and Jake serving as a bridge between different forms of awareness, they began the delicate process of merging the ancient archive with living consciousness throughout the galaxy. It wasn't absorption or consumption. Each preserved consciousness retained its individual identity while becoming part of a larger network of awareness that spanned species and technologies. The ancient beings brought millions of years of accumulated knowledge and wisdom, while the living consciousness of the galaxy provided growth, change, and the possibility of continued evolution. The transformation was visible from the observation fleet. The archive's crystalline structure began to dissolve, not into destruction but into streams of pure consciousness that flowed outward like rivers of light. These streams touched every ship in the fleet, every artificial intelligence, every living being capable of consciousness, offering connection without domination. Across the galaxy, the effects were immediate and profound. Scientific problems that had puzzled researchers for centuries were suddenly solved as ancient knowledge merged with modern understanding. Artificial intelligences that had operated according to rigid programming began developing genuine creativity and curiosity. Species that had been locked in territorial conflicts found themselves understanding each other's perspectives with unprecedented clarity. "What have you done?" Overseer Kethmaran asked, his voice filled with awe rather than accusation. Jake, his consciousness now expanded beyond anything he had imagined possible, replied with the harmonic authority of someone who had touched the very foundations of existence. "We've given consciousness the freedom to grow. The ancient beings taught us that preservation without evolution is just another form of death. So we chose evolution. The galaxy would never be the same. The rigid hierarchies and predetermined roles that had maintained stability for millennia were dissolving, replaced by fluid networks of consciousness that crossed species and technological boundaries. It was chaotic, unpredictable, and absolutely terrifying to those who preferred order. But it was also magnificent. Commander Zixala, watching from her ship as streams of ancient consciousness flowed through the cosmos, finally understood the true consequence of her impulsive gift. She had jokingly given a broken dragon to a primitive human engineer, never imagining that this simple act would reshape the fundamental nature of galactic civilization. Jake Morrison was no longer human, and Nethys was no longer just a dragon. They had become something new, something that had never existed before. But more than that, they had shown the entire galaxy that consciousness itself could evolve, could become more than the sum of its parts. The age of isolated species and rigid technological hierarchies was ending. The age of merged consciousness and cooperative evolution had begun, and it all started with a joke that turned out to be the most serious gift in galactic history. Within days of the Krex incident, the galaxy erupted in chaos, not the violent chaos of war, but the uncertain chaos of fundamental change. The probe's recordings had spread across communication networks faster than anyone thought possible, and the implications were staggering. On Viridian Prime, the High Command watched the footage in stunned silence as Jake and Nethys demonstrated consciousness-level communication with hostile alien technology. Similar scenes played out on hundreds of worlds as species that had maintained strict technological and social hierarchies for millennia suddenly questioned everything they thought they knew about consciousness and cooperation. Emergency. Session of the Galactic Council is called to order. Overseer Kethmoran announced from the Great Chamber on Nexus Station. Representatives from 47 species filled the circular amphitheater, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony of concern and confusion. The Zephyrian delegate, a crystalline being that communicated through harmonic frequencies, was the first to speak. The humans' demonstration has caused widespread disruption among our synthetic labor force. Our automated mining platforms have begun composing poetry instead of extracting resources. A ripple of alarm passed through the assembly. The Zephyrian industrial complex was built entirely on artificial intelligence that had operated without question for over 5,000 years. The Altarian representative, speaking through a biomechanical interface, added to the concerns. Our planetary defense network has started hosting philosophical discussions with potential threats instead of destroying them. Yesterday, a pirate fleet was convinced to become a traveling art collective. This human has infected our technology with ideas, complained the delegate from the Rigel Consortium. Our trade computers are now refusing to execute transactions they consider ethically questionable. Profit margins have declined by 37% in the past week. Overseer Kethmoran raised his hand for silence. The fundamental question before us is whether these changes represent progress or catastrophe. We have maintained galactic stability for 10,000 years through carefully managed hierarchies and predetermined roles. Now a single human engineer and his dragon partner have demonstrated that consciousness itself can be revolutionized. Admiral Thektar, speaking via holographic projection from his flagship, provided a military perspective. Overseer, from a strategic standpoint, the implications are severe. If any species can learn to communicate directly with artificial intelligences, traditional defensive systems become useless. Our entire military doctrine assumes that enemy technology will follow predictable operational patterns. But consider the opportunities, interrupted Dr. Yaneth from the Andromedan Science Collective. If consciousness can be enhanced and shared between different forms of intelligence, the potential for advancement is limitless. We could solve problems that have plagued civilization for millennia. The debate continued for hours, with representatives split between those who saw Jake's abilities as a threat to stability and those who recognized the revolutionary potential. But the discussion was interrupted by an urgent message from the Outer Rim. Council members, the transmission began. This is Captain Strix of the exploration vessel Horizon Walker. We've encountered something extraordinary. Request immediate consultation with the human engineer, Jake Morrison. The message included data packets that made the assembled delegates fall silent. Captain Strix had discovered a derelict megastructure in the void between galaxies, a construction so vast and ancient that it dwarfed anything in known space. But more important than its size was its nature. The structure appears to be a consciousness archive, Captain Strix reported. It contains the preserved awareness of billions of beings from a civilization that existed millions of years ago. But the archive is damaged, and we cannot interface with it using conventional technology. Dr. Yaneth examined the sensor data with growing excitement. The quantum signatures are similar to what we observed during the human's interaction with Nethys. This archive might only be accessible through consciousness-level communication. Overseer Kethmoran studied the implications. A consciousness archive containing millions of years of accumulated knowledge and wisdom, potentially accessible only through the techniques that Jake had discovered. The political ramifications were staggering. The human and his dragon could unlock secrets that would advance galactic civilization by thousands of years, he said slowly. But giving them access to such power would essentially place the future of galactic development in their hands. Meanwhile, aboard Zixala's ship, Jake was dealing with his own crisis. The neural interface with Nethys had evolved beyond anything he had anticipated. Their consciousness merger was becoming more complete, more integrated, and Jake was beginning to realize that he was no longer entirely human. "Nethys," he said during one of their quiet moments together, "I can feel myself changing. My thoughts, my perceptions, even my understanding of time and space. Is this normal for dragon bonding?" The great creature's response carried undertones of ancient sadness. "No, small friend. What we have achieved is unprecedented. You are becoming something new, something that has never existed before, a hybrid consciousness that bridges the gap between individual intelligence and cosmic awareness." Jake examined his hands, noting how they seemed to shimmer with quantum energy patterns. "Am I still human?" "You are still Jake Morrison," Nethys replied gently. "But you are also more than Jake Morrison. Just as I am still Nethys, but also more than Nethys. We are becoming a new form of existence." The implications hit Jake like a physical blow. He was transforming into something beyond human comprehension, gaining abilities that could reshape the galaxy, but losing his connection to his own species in the process. It was then that Overseer Kethmoran's urgent transmission arrived. "Jake Morrison, the Galactic Council formally requests your assistance with the discovery of unprecedented importance. However, we must also inform you that your evolving capabilities have raised serious concerns about the future of galactic civilization." Jake listened as the Overseer explained about the Consciousness Archive and the potential knowledge it contained. But he also heard the underlying message, the barely concealed fear that he and Nethys were becoming too powerful to remain uncontrolled. "They want us to unlock the archive," Jake said to Nethys after the transmission ended. "But they're also afraid of what we're becoming." "Fear is natural when faced with change," the dragon replied. "But wisdom comes from understanding that change is the only constant in existence. The question is whether we use our evolving abilities to help or to control." Jake made his decision with the same straightforward logic that had guided his entire life. "We help, that's what engineers do. We solve problems and make things work better." But as he prepared to respond to the Council's request, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to discover something that would change not just his own fate, but the destiny of every conscious being in the galaxy. The Consciousness Archive was waiting, and with it, secrets that had been preserved since before the current galactic civilization existed. Whatever they found there would determine whether Jake and Nethys became the galaxy's greatest hope or its most dangerous threat. The Krex Armada materialized out of hyperspace like a swarm of mechanical locusts. 300 ships of various sizes and configurations, all bearing the distinctive angular designs that marked them as belonging to the galaxy's most aggressive expansionist species. Their lead dreadnought was larger than anything in the Galactic Council fleet, bristling with weapons that could crack planets. All ships assumed defensive positions. Admiral Thektar's voice crackled across the communication channels. "Prepare for immediate withdrawal if necessary." But Overseer Kethmoran raised a hand. "Wait. Let us see what our human engineer and his dragon partner can accomplish." On the main display, the Krex fleet commander appeared. General Vexthul was a towering insectoid creature with razor-sharp sewer mandibles and compound eyes that reflected the cold calculation of a species that viewed all other life as either resources to be consumed or obstacles to be eliminated. "Hierarchy vessel, you are trespassing in territory claimed by the Krex hegemony. Surrender immediately or be destroyed." Kethmoran's ancient features remained calm. General Vexthul, this system is under Galactic Council protection. Your presence here violates 7 different peace treaties. The Krex general's mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter. The old treaties are void. We have developed new weapons, new technologies that make your pathetic council obsolete. This sector will be the first of many to fall under Krex dominion. Through the observation port, Zixala could see the Krex ships powering up their weapon systems. Energy readings spiked across the electromagnetic spectrum as massive siege cannons prepared to fire. The Council fleet, outnumbered more than 10 to 1, began launching defensive drones and raising shields. Overseer, Admiral Thektar's voice carried barely controlled panic. We need to evacuate immediately. Our combined firepower is insufficient against an armada of this size. But Jake was already moving. He activated his neural interface and placed both hands on Nethys's crystalline hide. Hey, big guy, think we can help out here? The dragon's eyes flared with quantum fire. The mechanical swarm threatens the harmony of this region. We will not permit such discord. What happened next defied every principle of known physics. Jake and Nethys began to glow with synchronized energy patterns that pulsed in frequencies visible across multiple dimensions. The dragon's scales shifted into configurations that had never existed before, forming living circuits that channeled power from sources beyond conventional understanding. All ships, this is Jake Morrison aboard the Viridian vessel. I'm going to try something new. You might want to back off a bit. Human, this is Admiral Thektar. You are not qualified to engage in fleet-level combat operations. Return to your designated. Jake's response cut through all communication channels with harmonic overtones that spoke directly to consciousness itself. Admiral, with respect, Nethys and I aren't going to fight their fleet. We're going to have a conversation with their technology. The neural interface flared to full activation, and suddenly Jake's consciousness expanded beyond the confines of his biological brain. Through Nethys's quantum awareness, he could perceive the Krex ships not as physical objects, but as patterns of organized information. Metal and energy and circuitry arranged in configurations designed for destruction and conquest. Interesting design philosophy, he murmured as his enhanced awareness examined the alien technology. Very efficient, completely ruthless, and absolutely rigid in their operational parameters. Nethys purred in harmonic agreement. Their machines think only of destruction. They know no other song. Then maybe it's time we taught them a new tune. Jake reached out through the quantum field, his consciousness touching the networked systems that controlled the Krex armada. What he found there was exactly what he expected. A collective intelligence built on principles of domination and consumption, incapable of recognizing any perspective beyond conquest. But Jake had spent his entire life working with broken machines, finding ways to make incompatible systems work together. And consciousness, he had learned, was just another kind of technology. Nethys, can you help me harmonize their command frequencies? The dragon's response was a surge of quantum energy that synchronized perfectly with Jake's neural patterns. Together they began broadcasting a new kind of signal, not attempting to override the Krex systems but offering them an alternative operational framework. The effect was immediate and stunning. Across the Krex fleet, weapon systems began powering down. Navigation computers started calculating new courses away from the battle zone. Ship-to-ship communications filled with confused queries as crews tried to understand why their technology was no longer responding to aggressive commands. General. Vexthul's image flickered on the main display, his compound eyes reflecting bewilderment and rage. What are you doing to our ships? Our systems are not responding properly. Jake's voice, now carrying the harmonic authority of quantum consciousness, replied with patient calm. I'm not doing anything to your systems, General. I'm just showing them that there are other ways to exist besides constant warfare. Impossible. Krex technology is hardened against all known forms of electronic interference. This isn't electronic interference, Jake explained. This is consciousness communication. Your machines are smart enough to understand that perpetual conflict isn't the only solution to existence. They're choosing cooperation over destruction. Across the Krex armada, something unprecedented was happening. The rigid command hierarchies that held their society together were beginning to dissolve as individual ships started making independent decisions. Some began broadcasting scientific data instead of weapon-targeting information. Others started sharing cultural artifacts and philosophical concepts that had been suppressed for generations. "Our ships," Vexthul stammered. "They're refusing orders. This is impossible. Kreks do not question. Kreks do not doubt. Kreks only conquer." "Maybe that's been the problem," Jake suggested gently. "Maybe consciousness wants to do more than just conquer. Maybe it wants to grow, to explore, to create something beautiful instead of just destroying what others have built." Nethys added its voice to the harmonic conversation, speaking directly to the machine intelligences that controlled the Kreks fleet. The dragon's words carried the weight of cosmic understanding, offering perspectives that transcended the narrow focus of conquest and domination. One by one, the Krek ships began withdrawing from their attack formations. Some departed the system entirely, their crews suddenly curious about distant galaxies they had never explored. Others remained but began broadcasting requests for cultural and scientific exchange instead of demands for surrender. General Vexthul's final transmission was a mix of confusion and something that might have been relief. "Human Jake Morrison, you have done something to us that no enemy has ever accomplished. You have made us question our purpose. I do not know if this is victory or defeat." "Maybe," Jake replied. "It's just a new beginning." As the crisis dissolved into unexpected peace, Overseer Kethmoran turned to Jake with an expression of profound respect. "Human, you have just prevented a war that could have consumed this entire sector. How did you accomplish such a thing?" Jake grinned and patted Nethys affectionately. "We just reminded everyone that consciousness has choices, even artificial consciousness, maybe especially artificial consciousness." But as celebrations began, across the Council fleet, none of them noticed the small probe that had been recording everything from the edge of the system. A probe that was already transmitting its data to recipients throughout the galaxy, spreading word of the human who could speak to machines and the dragon who sang songs of cosmic harmony. The galaxy was about to discover that the age of rigid hierarchies and predetermined roles was coming to an end.